Those puny humans, Commander Xanth scoffed on the bridge of his warship, not knowing his underestimation of Earth would soon become his greatest regret. Their primitive planet will fall within a week. Sir, our scout ships report the humans lack any technology to threaten our fleet, Xanth's reptilian first officer hissed. The Nausicaan flagship loomed over the blue marble of Earth, its plasma cannons charged and ready. I'm aware, Xanth snapped, his arrogance blinding him like it had so many Nausicaan commanders. Prepare the invasion force for deployment in 3 cycles. Let's wipe this world clean and be on our way. These pitiful apes won't even know what hit them. Far below, Gerald Rice mopped the floor in NASA's communication center. He froze as a guttural alien voice crackled through a monitoring system. Gerald stared at the speaker in disbelief. Had he just heard plans for an alien attack in 3 days? Heart-pounding, Gerald burst into his superior's office to warn her, but the astrophysicist rolled her eyes at the frantic janitor, babbling about an imminent alien invasion. Gerald raced home, his mind spinning. He had to stop this, no one else would listen. He spent the next 48 hours scouring NASA's database for any intel on the aliens. Finally, he found it, a report theorizing the aliens used an element in their hulls that, although common in space, was incredibly rare on Earth. Element 158. And it just so happened NASA had a small sample, stolen from a meteorite. Gerald had no choice. He slipped into the NASA lab after midnight, swiped the element 158, and spent the final day in his garage, MacGyvering a makeshift energy cannon powered by the exotic substance. He barely finished soldering the final circuit when a thunderous boom shook his house. Heart in his throat, Gerald looked up to see alien warships screaming across the sky. It was too late. The invasion had begun. Gerald floored his pickup to the NASA launch tower. He had one shot at this. Gasping for breath, he raced to the top level and aimed his cannon at the lead warship. His finger tightened on the trigger. The fate of the world hung in the balance. Gerald slammed his foot on the gas. The stolen NASA van tearing down the highway towards Washington, D.C. The radio crackled with static-laced reports of devastation. Newscasters' voices shook as they described Nausicaan plasma blasts reducing skyscrapers to rubble in New York. Alien shock troops marching through the burning streets of London, the Tokyo skyline ablaze with green alien fire. Gerald's hands clenched the steering wheel. He had to reach the capital, had to warn someone, anyone in the government who would listen before Earth fell completely. Swerving around abandoned cars, Gerald skidded to a halt as a mob of panicked civilians spilled onto the road in front of him. They were fleeing from something in the woods beyond, a telltale pillar of black smoke rising from behind the trees. A downed Nausicaan ship. Gerald grabbed his element rifle and jumped out, pushing through the crowd. He had to reach that crash site, salvage what weapons and intel he could. "Gerald, what the hell are you doing here?" a familiar voice barked. Gerald spun to see his brother Marcus emerge from the chaos, wearing his marine fatigues, an M16 in his hands. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Gerald's claims of alien messages had alienated him from the family. I was right, Marcus, about all of it. The aliens, the invasion, we have to—" A plasma blast split the air between them. Nausicaan soldiers burst from the tree line, energy rifles flaring. Marcus reacted instantly, combat instincts kicking in. He dragged Gerald behind a car as the aliens opened fire. "Jesus, Jerry, what did you get yourself into?" Marcus popped up to rake the alien's position with bullets. "I'm trying to save the world, okay?" Gerald aimed his makeshift weapon and fired. The element beam tore through a Nausicaan's armor like paper. The soldiers fell back behind the fuselage of their crashed ship, shouting in their guttural language. Marcus stared at the smoking hole in the alien's chest, then at Gerald's rifle. "Okay, little brother, you've got some explaining to do. Let's take these ugly bastards down." The siblings sprinted from cover to cover, Marcus's military training and Gerald's experimental weapon proving a lethal combination. They leapfrogged towards the ship until the last aliens fell. Marcus kicked down the hatch. Inside, a Nausicaan officer lay wounded, clutching a glowing plasma pistol. Marcus disarmed him and hauled the alien upright. "All right, Jerry, time to get some answers." Gerald aimed his rifle at the snarling creature. "Why are you attacking us? What do you want?" The Nausicaan spat a globule of blood. "Your planet is just another conquest ape. Commander Xanth will reduce your cities to ashes." "Where is this Commander Xanth?" Marcus growled, pressing his gun to the alien's temple. "On the command ship, orbiting your pathetic planet, shielded from your primitive weapons." The Nausicaan's words dissolved into hacking laughter. Gerald and Marcus exchanged a grim look. They had the target. Now they just had to figure out how to reach it. "The Zeus cannon," Marcus said suddenly. "The military's been developing a weapon based on your element discovery. Some egghead figured out how to supercharge element 158 into an orbital strike. It's hidden under the White House." A buzzing from the ship's cockpit interrupted him. Marcus shoved past, weapon ready. He hit the flashing button on the console. Instantly, a hologram of a scarred Nausicaan face flickered to life. "So you are the human maggot who thinks he can defy the might of the Nausicaan Empire," Commander Xanth sneered, fixing his yellow eyes on Gerald. "Impudent primate. I will break you myself. I will make you watch as I personally execute every member of your pathetic species. Your defiance has earned you that." "Good luck, you scaly son of a bitch. I'm coming for you." Gerald cut the link. He turned to Marcus. "If we're going to pull this off, we'll need supplies from the crash site. Weapons, ammo, anything useful." Marcus nodded, already scavenging charge packs from the alien rifles. They salvaged what they could and headed for the van. Marcus took the wheel as they roared down the deserted highway, the ruined Washington Monument rising in the distance. Ahead, the White House perimeter flickered with flames and smoke. They were a block away when a plasma mortar exploded in the street before them. Marcus swerved into the remains of the Smithsonian Gardens and slammed to a stop just as a horde of Nausicaan shock troops materialized from the gloom. At their head stood a towering Nausicaan in spiked black armor, a crackling plasma glaive in his claws. Xanth. "Humans," the commander bellowed. "Prepare to die!" "Then I guess this is it. The final fight." Gerald gripped his element gun and slammed a fresh charge pack into the stock. "For Earth." Marcus shot him a fierce grin. "For Earth, by the way, Jerry. Sorry I didn't believe you all this time." "I know, I'm sorry too, for everything." The brothers clasped hands, then leapt out to face the onrushing aliens, guns blazing. The fate of the human race hung on the courage of two men. The battle for Earth had begun. The echoes of plasma fire faded as Gerald and Marcus dove behind a crumbling wall. Chunks of concrete rained down around them. Gerald's ears rang from the constant barrage of alien weaponry. "We're pinned down," Marcus shouted, popping up to squeeze off a burst from his scavenged Nausicaan rifle. The weapon hummed and spat bolts of energy, forcing a group of advancing shock troops to scatter. Gerald gritted his teeth, his own alien weapon feeling uncomfortably hot in his hands. "We can't hold this position." A booming voice cut through the chaos. Commander Xanth strode through the ruined White House fence, his spiked armor gleaming in the fires of battle. "Surrender, humans! Your pitiful resistance ends now!" Without waiting for a response, Marcus vaulted over their cover, laying down suppressing fire as he sprinted toward a cluster of Nausicaan corpses. Gerald cursed and leaned out, his element rifle spitting deadly beams that forced the aliens to duck. Understanding clicked. Gerald dashed toward the damaged Nausicaan troop carrier, plasma bolts screaming past his head. He slid into the open hatch, fumbling with the alien controls. Sweat poured down his face as he tried to decipher the symbols. Gerald swung the turret around, unleashing a devastating barrage on the shocked Nausicaans. Alien bodies flew through the air as explosions rocked their formation. In the chaos, Commander Xanth found himself cut off from his troops. "Now!" Marcus shouted. Gerald gunned the engine, ramming the APC straight into Xanth. The alien commander slammed against a wall, pinned by the vehicle's bulk. Before he could recover, Marcus was on him, twisting Xanth's arms behind his back. Gerald leapt from the APC, his element rifle trained on Xanth's head. "Not so tough now, are you?" Her deep rumble shook the ground. Gerald's triumph turned to horror as an enormous mechanical monstrosity lumbered into view. The Nausicaan mech towered over the battlefield, its arms dripping with weaponry. "Get down!" Marcus yelled as precision plasma beams cut through the remaining human defenders. Bodies fell left and right as the mech methodically decimated their forces. Gerald's mind raced. There was no way they'd reach the bunker with that thing active. His eyes fell on the grenade belt. "Marcus, throw me those grenades!" As Marcus sprinted for the bunker entrance, Gerald charged directly at the mech. He fired his element rifle, the strange weapon's beams splashing harmlessly off the robot's armor, but it was enough to draw its attention. The mech's head swiveled, targeting systems locking onto Gerald. At the last second, he dove between its massive legs. His hands flew, latching the primed grenades onto its undercarriage. Gerald rolled clear just as the explosives detonated. The blast rocked the White House grounds. With a thunderous crash, the mechanical titan toppled backward, crushing the roof of the presidential residence. Wasting no time, Gerald sprinted to where Marcus struggled with the bunker's access panel. Xanth's stolen codes finally worked. The blast doors slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. As they piled inside, sealing the entrance behind them, Xanth's enraged voice echoed across the battlefield. "Find them! Tear this place apart if you have to!" The brothers raced through stark concrete corridors, the sounds of Nausicaan weapons fire growing closer. They burst into the armory, frantically searching for anything that could turn the tide. Gerald nodded grimly. "The element weapon. But it's unstable as hell. We could blow ourselves to kingdom come." Alien footsteps pounded above them. They shared a look of steadfast perseverance. "One of us has to get to their command ship," Gerald said. Marcus hefted the cannon. "Let's do this." With the fate of humanity hanging in the balance, the brothers prepared to fight their way back to the surface. The unstable element cannon hummed with barely contained power as Gerald and Marcus fought their way upward through the White House bunker. Nausicaan shock troops poured down the stairs, their alien weaponry scorching the concrete walls. "Cover me!" Marcus shouted, ducking behind a fallen support beam. Gerald unleashed a blast from the cannon, vaporizing 3 Nausicaans in a flash of searing light. The recoil slammed him back against the wall. "This thing packs a punch," Gerald yelled over the din of battle. They pressed on, Gerald's cannon clearing a path while Marcus picked off stragglers, with precise bursts from his stolen rifle. Finally, they burst out onto the presidential grounds. The once manicured lawn was a hellscape of craters and burning debris. The Nausicaan command ship loomed over DC, a massive construct of alien metal overflowing with weapons. Energy shields shimmered around it, creating an impenetrable barrier. "We'll never reach that on foot," Gerald said, panting. Marcus scanned the area, his military training kicking in. "Look, that dropship!" An abandoned Nausicaan craft sat on the scorched grass nearby. They sprinted for it, plasma bolts from Xanth's forces nipping at their heels. Marcus slammed the hatch controls as Gerald dove inside. "You fly, I'll shoot," Gerald called, manning the ship's turret. The engines roared to life as Marcus wrestled with the alien controls. They lurched into the air, Marcus cursing as he tried to decipher the nav computer's strange symbols. "Incoming," Gerald shouted. A blast from a defensive turret rocked the ship. Alarms blared as they spiraled out of control, hurtling towards the command ship's energy barrier. "We're gonna crash," Marcus yelled. Gerald's mind raced. There was only one chance. He grabbed a spacesuit from the emergency locker and started putting it on. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded. "Something stupid," Gerald replied. "Get me to the airlock." As Marcus fought the controls, Gerald made his way to the outer hatch, element cannon in hand. He gave his brother one last nod before Marcus hit the release. The vacuum of space sucked Gerald out violently. He tumbled end over end, desperately orienting himself towards a shimmer in the energy field, a possible weak point. Gerald fired the cannon, its element beam lancing out and piercing the barrier. He slammed into the field at full speed, feeling the suit's systems overload from the energy discharge. For a moment, Gerald thought he'd be incinerated, but then he was through, careening towards the command ship's hull. Gerald fired again and again, blasting his way through layers of alien metal. The cannon's power cell flickered and died just as he breached the final bulkhead, tumbling onto the bridge in a shower of sparks and twisted debris. Commander Xanth stood there, his alien features twisting into a snarl of rage. "You!" Gerald shed the ruined spacesuit, squaring off against the towering Nausicaan. "It's over, Xanth." The alien commander lunged, his clawed hands raking across Gerald's chest. Gerald stumbled back, barely avoiding a follow-up blow that dented the metal flooring. They traded savage blows, Gerald using his smaller size to duck and weave around Xanth's powerful swings. Blood and sweat stung Gerald's eyes as he gradually wore the alien down. Finally, Gerald saw an opening. He grabbed Xanth's arm, using the Nausicaan's momentum to slam him into a control panel. Gerald snatched up the alien's fallen disruptor pistol, leveling it at Xanth's head. A movement caught Gerald's eye. Another Nausicaan officer was rushing towards a different console, likely to call for reinforcements. Gerald had seconds to decide. Kill Xanth or stop the invasion for good? With gritted teeth, Gerald spun and fired at the ship's main computer core. Energy arced wildly as systems failed across the bridge. The entire vessel shuddered, beginning its death plunge towards the Potomac below. "No!" Xanth roared, hurling himself at Gerald. Before the enraged commander could reach him, a surge of power from a damaged conduit struck Xanth full force. The Nausicaan leader was blown backwards, smashing through the view screen and plummeting towards the river far below. Klaxons blared as the ship entered freefall. Gerald scrambled for an escape pod, strapping himself in just before impact. The pod shot free moments before the command ship struck the water in a massive explosion that shook the entire city. Gerald drifted downstream, battered but alive. In the distance he heard a familiar voice calling his name. Marcus. Gerald hauled himself from the murky waters of the Potomac, his lungs burning as he gasped for air. The wreckage of the Nausicaan command ship smoldered behind him, casting an eerie glow across the nighttime sky. He stumbled onto the muddy shore, collapsing onto his knees. "Gerald!" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. His brother sprinted towards him, rifle still clutched tightly. "You crazy son of a bitch, I thought you were dead." Gerald coughed, spitting river water. "Takes more than that to kill me." As Marcus helped him to his feet, the brothers surveyed the devastation around them. The White House grounds lay in ruins, littered with alien and human bodies alike. But in the distance, cheers began to rise from pockets of surviving resistance fighters. "We did it," Marcus said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "We actually did it." Gerald nodded grimly. "This battle maybe, but the war's not nearly finished." In the days that followed, Gerald and Marcus found themselves thrust into leadership roles as Earth's remaining military forces regrouped. They pored over intel gleaned from captured Nausicaans, piecing together the locations of alien strongholds across the globe. "Here," Gerald said, pointing to a map in their makeshift war room, "the plasma cannon factory in the Andes. If we take that out, we cripple their heavy weapons production." Marcus nodded, studying the terrain. "Agreed, but we'll need air support to breach their defenses." They coordinated strike after strike, pushing the alien invaders back. Gerald's first-hand experience with Nausicaan tech proved invaluable, allowing human forces to exploit weaknesses in enemy shields and communications. Weeks turned into a month of relentless combat. Gerald barely slept, driven by the need to see this through. The final push came in Sydney, Australia. The brothers led a joint task force of Marines and local resistance fighters, battling through the ruins of the once bustling metropolis. Plasma fire lit up the night as they stormed the Nausicaan base, a converted opera house overlooking the harbor. Gerald ducked behind a fallen pillar as alien troops poured from the building. "Marcus," he shouted over the din of battle, "we need to flank them." His brother nodded, signaling to a squad of soldiers. They charged forward, drawing the Nausicaans' attention while Gerald led another team around the side. The fighting was brutal, but eventually they breached the alien defenses. Inside they found the Nausicaan commander, cornered and snarling. Gerald approached, element gun trained on the alien's head. "It's over," he said. "Tell us what we want to know, and maybe you'll live to see your homeworld again." The commander's eyes darted between the brothers before slumping in defeat. "Xanth," he spat. "The coward fled to Mars. He speaks of building a new army, one that will crush your pitiful species once and for all." Gerald exchanged a grim look with Marcus. Their victory suddenly felt hollow. As long as Xanth lived, Earth would never truly be safe. Gerald nodded. "Agreed, but we can't do it alone." They spent the next week assembling an elite team, gathering the best of Earth's remaining special forces. Under cover of night, they boarded a captured Nausicaan dropship, its alien tech reconfigured for human use. As the craft lifted off, leaving Earth's atmosphere behind, Gerald stared out the viewport at the blue marble shrinking beneath them. Everything they'd fought for, everyone they'd lost, it all came down to this final mission. Marcus clasped his shoulder. "You ready for this?" The dropship accelerated, carrying them towards Mars and their final confrontation with Xanth. The fate of humanity hung in the balance as they hurtled through the void of space, ready to take the fight to the enemy's doorstep. Dr. Cohen looked up from his makeshift notepad. "It's fascinating, really. We could be witnessing an unprecedented case of cultural amnesia on a planetary scale." Gerald stopped pacing and faced the xenobiologist. "Or it could be an elaborate trap." Before Cohen could respond, the cell door slid open with a soft hiss. 2 Ceresian guards entered, their scaled skin glistening under the harsh lighting. One of them gestured to Gerald. Gerald exchanged a glance with Cohen before following the guards out of the cell. They led him through winding corridors of gleaming metal and pulsing energy conduits. The architecture was hauntingly familiar, yet subtly different from the Nausicaan ships he'd fought against years ago. They entered a vast chamber dominated by a semicircular table. Seated behind it were 5 Ceresians, their features a disturbing echo of the Nausicaans who had nearly destroyed Earth. At the center sat the being Gerald had mistaken for Xanth. The Xanth lookalike leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We've reviewed your story, Gerald Rice of Earth. It's troubling, to say the least." Gerald's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Troubling? Your people nearly wiped out my entire species." A murmur rippled through the council members. The Xanth doppelganger held up a hand for silence. "Please understand, we have no memory of these events. Our historical records show no evidence of interstellar conflict." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "Then how do you explain this?" He gestured to the alien's face. "You're the spitting image of Commander Xanth." The Ceresian's expression softened. "My name is Zal. I assure you I've never commanded any military force. I'm a teacher of philosophy." Gerald's head spun. He thought of the peaceful city they'd observed, so different from the warmongering Nausicaans he'd fought. Could Dr. Cohen's theory be right? Zal continued, "We've analyzed the data from your ship. The genetic similarities between our species are undeniable, but we've also found evidence of extensive modifications to our genome." Another council member spoke up, her voice tinged with awe. "It appears our ancestors underwent a deliberate process of genetic alteration. Aggressive tendencies were systematically removed from our population." Zal nodded solemnly. "It seems so, though the specifics of how and why have been lost to time." For a moment Gerald saw a flicker of the old Xanth in Zal's eyes. Not cruelty, but a deep haunting sadness. He realized with a start that these aliens were as much victims of their past as humans had been. As Gerald contemplated the weight of this moment, he knew his next words could shape the future of both their species. Gerald looked at Zal, weighing his words carefully. "We need time to process this information. My crew and I would like to study your civilization more closely if you'll allow it." Zal nodded, his scaled skin catching the light. "Of course. We're eager to learn from you as well. You'll have full access to our city and its people." Over the next weeks, Gerald and Dr. Cohen immersed themselves in Ciresian society. They walked the gleaming streets, marveling at the advanced technology that seemed to hum beneath every surface. Holographic displays floated in the air, Ciresians manipulating data with practiced ease. "It's remarkable," Dr. Cohen said, scribbling notes furiously. "Their tech is light years beyond what the Nausicans used during the invasion." As they delved deeper, Gerald's unease grew. In a sprawling manufacturing complex, he saw lower-caste Ciresians toiling endlessly, their scaled bodies glistening with sweat. A supervisor barked orders, his ornate robes marking him as one of the elite. Gerald clenched his fists, memories of Nausicaan slave camps flashing through his mind. He turned to Dr. Cohen. "You seeing this?" Before the xenobiologist could respond, a commotion erupted nearby. They rushed to find a Ciresian worker collapsed on the ground, clutching his throat. Without hesitation, Gerald pushed through the growing crowd and performed the Heimlich maneuver, dislodging a small component from the alien's airway. The worker gasped, drawing in ragged breaths. Around them, other Ciresians murmured in awe. Gerald helped the alien to his feet, only to find himself face to face with the furious supervisor. "How dare you?" the Ciresian elite snarled. "You've violated the natural order. Guards, detain this outsider." Security forces moved in, energy weapons humming to life. Gerald raised his hands. "I was just trying to help." His words were cut off by a sudden roar from the crowd. Workers surged forward, forming a protective circle around Gerald and Dr. Cohen. One of them, a scarred Ciresian with fierce eyes, shouted, "No more! We won't let you punish those who show compassion." Chaos erupted. Workers grappled with security forces as alarms blared throughout the facility. In the confusion, Gerald felt a hand grab his arm. He turned to see the scarred Ciresian. "Come with me if you want to live," the alien said, tugging Gerald and Dr. Cohen towards an emergency exit. They raced through winding back alleys, the sounds of rioting fading behind them. Eventually they reached a nondescript building. Inside, Gerald found himself in a hidden command center, filled with determined-looking Ciresians, hunched over displays and communication equipment. The scarred Ciresian faced Gerald, his expression grim. "I am Zarathos. Welcome to the Resistance." Over the next hours, Zarathos explained the harsh reality of Ciresian society. The pacifism Gerald had observed was a carefully constructed facade, masking a ruthless caste system that kept the majority of the population in near slavery. "We've waited generations for a catalyst like you," Zarathos said. "Your actions today may have finally ignited the spark we needed." Gerald's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The Ciresians weren't simply peaceful Nausicaan cousins. They were a twisted evolution of that warrior race, channeling their aggression into societal control rather than outright conquest. As Zarathos outlined their plans for revolution, Gerald found himself torn. He knew that helping the rebels could reignite the Ciresians' dormant aggression, potentially creating a threat as dangerous as the Nausicans had been. But could he turn his back on an oppressed people fighting for freedom? Gerald stared at the tactical displays, wrestling with the weight of his decision. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and he knew that whatever choice he made would. Gerald stared at the tactical displays, wrestling with the weight of his decision. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and he knew that whatever choice he made would have far-reaching consequences. After a long moment, he turned to Zarathos. "I'll help you," Gerald said, his voice firm. "But we do this my way." Over the next few days, Gerald made covert trips to the cloaked Armstrong, slipping past Ciresian patrols with the help of Zarathos's network. He returned with crates of weapons and tactical gear, teaching the rebels how to use them in hidden training grounds beneath the city. "Remember," Gerald instructed a group of wide-eyed Ciresians, "hit fast and vanish. You can't match their firepower, so use speed and surprise." He demonstrated how to assemble improvised explosive devices from common materials, the rebels watching intently as his hands moved with practiced ease. As the training progressed, Gerald noticed a change in the rebels. Their movements became more confident, their eyes sharper, but the weight of what he was doing never left him. One night, as Gerald prepared for another training session, alarms blared through the safe house. Zarathos burst in, his scales flushed with exertion. "We've been compromised. Security forces are—" The wall exploded inward, showering them with debris. Elite guards poured through the breach, energy weapons blazing. Gerald dove for cover, returning fire with his sidearm. Chaos engulfed the room. Rebels and guards grappled in close quarters, the air thick with shouts and weapon fire. Gerald fought his way to a computer terminal, frantically deleting files as blaster bolts whizzed past his head. A scream cut through the din. Gerald turned to see a young rebel fall, a smoking hole in his chest. Gritting his teeth, Gerald finished wiping the data and smashed the terminal. As he turned to escape, a stun blast caught him square in the back. Gerald's muscles locked up as he collapsed, consciousness fading as armored boots surrounded him. He awoke in a stark white room, shackled to a chair. Before him sat the Cirician Council, their faces impassive. At the center, a Cirician with elaborate robes and cold eyes regarded Gerald with disdain. "I am Archon Skiras," the Cirician said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You stand accused of fomenting insurrection against the rightful rulers of Ciricia. How do you plead?" Gerald met Skiras's gaze unflinchingly. "Your rightful rule is built on the backs of slaves. You're no better than the Nausicans." Skiras leaned forward, a cruel smile playing across his scaled features. "Perhaps we can reach an arrangement. Tell us the location of your ship and any other off-world technology, and we may show leniency." "Go to hell," Gerald spat. Skiras's eyes flashed with rage. He stood towering over Gerald. "So be it. You will serve as an example to all who would defy us. Guards, take him to the plaza. Let all of Ciricia witness the price of rebellion." Rough hands seized Gerald, dragging him from the chamber. They brought him to a vast open space in the heart of the city, where a contraption of metal and pulsing energy waited. Gerald struggled as they strapped him in, feeling a sharp pain as needles pierced his skin. Skiras's voice boomed across the plaza. "Behold the fate of those who challenge the natural order. This outsider sought to corrupt our society. Now he will die slowly, his nervous system unraveling before your eyes." Gerald felt a burning sensation spreading through his body. He furrowed his eyebrows, refusing to cry out as the prion pathogen began its work. The crowd murmured, a mix of fear and fascination. Suddenly a rock arced through the air, striking a guard. More projectiles followed. Shouts of anger rose from the assembled Ciricians. Gerald watched through blurring vision as the crowd surged forward, overwhelming the unprepared security forces. In the chaos, he heard the familiar whine of Cirician engines. Rebel craft streaked overhead, strafing the plaza's defenses. A figure in a stolen guard uniform rushed to Gerald's side. Dr. Cohen. "Hang on," the scientist said, working to disable the pathogen delivery system. "We're getting you out of here." As Cohen freed him, Gerald saw Zarathos leading a team to sabotage the plaza's power grid. Alarms wailed as sections of the city went dark. Rebel forces poured from hidden entrances, clashing with elite guards in the streets. Cohen and another rebel half-carried Gerald to a waiting vehicle. They sped through twisting tunnels beneath the capital, eventually reaching a makeshift lab where Cirician engineers huddled around complex equipment. "We used your genetic profile to synthesize an inhibitor," one of the engineers explained, injecting Gerald with a glowing substance. It should neutralize the prion's effects. As the cure took hold, Gerald felt strength returning to his limbs. He stood, turning to Zarathos. "What's our status?" The scarred Cirician's eyes gleamed with fierce pride. "The common people have risen. We're seizing control of key facilities across the planet, but the Archons are trying to escape to the orbital platforms." Gerald nodded, his mind racing with tactical options. "We need to cut off their retreat. If they reach those defense stations, they could obliterate the entire rebellion." They quickly formulated a plan. coordinating rebel assets to target the space elevators and launch facilities. Gerald joined Zarathos in a command center, directing strike teams to critical choke points. Reports flooded in of victories across Ceresia. The elite's control was crumbling in the face of the people's fury. On a tactical display, Gerald watched as the Archon's shuttles launched, racing for the safety of orbit. Suddenly alarms blared. One of the fleeing shuttles, struck by rebel fire, veered wildly off course. Gerald's eyes widened as he saw its trajectory. "The Armstrong!" he shouted. The shuttle slammed into empty space and bounced off the cloaked ship's hull, the impact dispelling its camouflage. The mighty vessel shimmered into view, hovering above the Ceresian capital. Gerald's comm crackled to life. "This is Captain Reeves of the Armstrong. Need a hand down there, Rice?" A grin spread across Gerald's face. "Glad you could join the party, Captain. We've got some unfinished business to attend to." He turned to Zarathos. "That shuttle that hit us, who was on board?" The Ceresian checked his display, his eyes narrowing. "Archon Skirus himself." Gerald's expression hardened. "Then it's time we paid him a visit." They boarded a rebel craft, racing towards the crippled shuttle now drifting in low orbit. As they approached, Gerald saw Skirus emerging from the wreckage, rage twisting his features. Gerald stepped onto the shuttle's torn hull, facing the Ceresian dictator. Skirus snarled, lunging at him with inhuman speed. The two grappled fiercely, trading blows as they fought for control. Gerald's muscles screamed as he grappled with Skirus, the Ceresian Archon's strength belying his age. They crashed against the shuttle's twisted bulkhead, the metal groaning under their combined weight. Skirus's clawed hand raked across Gerald's face, drawing blood. "You dare challenge the natural order?" Skirus hissed, his scaled features contorted with rage. Gerald ducked another wild swing, his mind racing. He couldn't match the Archon's raw power, but he knew the Armstrong like the back of his hand. An idea formed. "Come on, you oversized lizard," Gerald taunted, inching towards the ship's entry hatch. "Show me what you've got." Skirus lunged forward, his momentum carrying them both through the open hatch. Gerald's hand found the emergency release panel. He slammed it, triggering the explosive bolts. The hatch blew outward with a deafening bang. Atmosphere rushed past them in a furious torrent. Gerald clung to a support strut as Skirus, caught off guard, was yanked backwards. The Archon's talons scrabbled for purchase, leaving deep gouges in the deck plating. For a moment their eyes met. Gerald saw fear replace the rage in Skirus's gaze. Then the vacuum claimed him. Gerald watched as Skirus tumbled away, a small figure against the backdrop of Ceresia. The Archon's limbs flailed uselessly as he spiraled into the planet's upper atmosphere. With the immediate threat neutralized, Gerald turned his attention to the broader conflict. He linked up with Zarathos and the rebel forces, coordinating strikes against loyalist strongholds in orbit. The Armstrong's superior firepower proved decisive, disabling defense platforms and forcing the surrender of elite holdouts. Days blurred together in a frenzy of activity. Gerald moved from command centers to frontline positions, offering tactical advice and rallying the newly liberated Ceresians. Finally, a week after Skirus's defeat, Zarathos stood before a sea of jubilant faces in the capital plaza. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Gerald stood off to the side, a small smile on his face as he watched history unfold. Later, in a quieter ceremony, the new transitional government presented Gerald and his crew with ornate medals crafted from precious Ceresian metals. "You have given us hope," a newly appointed minister said, clasping Gerald's hand. "Allow us to offer something in return." The Ceresians revealed schematics for a propulsion system beyond anything humanity had achieved. Gerald's eyes widened as he studied the designs, recognizing their potential to revolutionize space travel. As the Armstrong prepared for departure, Gerald took one last look at the Ceresian capital. The scars of conflict were still visible, but there was an energy in the air, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. "Think we did the right thing?" Dr. Cohen asked, joining Gerald on the observation deck. Gerald nodded. We gave them a chance, the rest is up to them. The journey back to Earth was uneventful, filled with anticipation of sharing their discoveries. As they entered Earth's orbit, however, Gerald received a priority transmission ordering him to report to the United Earth Security Council immediately upon landing. Air stone settled in Gerald's stomach as he was escorted into the council chambers. The faces of Earth's most powerful leaders stared down at him, their expressions unreadable. Commander Gerald Rice, a stern-faced woman intoned, you stand accused of violating the Interregulations Mandate through unauthorized intervention in the affairs of a pre-contact civilization. How do you plead? Before Gerald could respond, a familiar figure stepped forward. Colonel Jameson, his former rival, now wore the insignia of the Judge Advocate General's office. Members of the Council, Jameson began, his voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. Commander Rice's actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, represent a grave threat to humanity's safety in this new interstellar age. We cannot allow rogue agents to play God with alien civilizations. The ensuing debate stretched for hours. Gerald listened as the council members argued, their positions ranging from calls for leniency to demands for harsh punishment. He recognized the fear underlying many of their statements, fear of the unknown, fear of provoking another Nausicaan-like threat. He thought of the liberated Ceresians, of the technological marvels they had shared. He remembered the hope in Zarathus's eyes as they planned for a free future. Yet here, in the heart of human civilization, that spark of adventure seemed to have dimmed. Gerald walked out into the sunlight of a world he had fought to protect, wondering if that protection had come at too high a cost. He turned back to his workstation, where holographic displays flickered with data from the particle research facility. Sci-Fi, run simulation 47B again, he said, his voice carrying a hint of weariness. The air shimmered as Sci-Fi's avatar materialized, a shifting, translucent form of light and data. Certainly, Gerald, though I must point out this is the 12th iteration today. Gerald rubbed his temples. I know, but something's not adding up in the energy calculations. As Sci-Fi processed the request, Gerald reflected on the AI's presence in his life. Developed in secret by a cadre of brilliant minds pushing the boundaries of artificial cognition, SI had become his constant companion and intellectual sparring partner. The next morning, Gerald arrived at the facility early. He nodded to Dr. Emerson, the lead researcher, as they entered the main lab. Big day, Emerson said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. If this works, we'll revolutionize our understanding of particle interactions. Gerald grunted non-committally. He'd learned to temper his expectations. As the experiment began, a low hum filled the air. Diagnostic screens flickered with streams of data. Gerald watched intently, his instincts screaming that something was off. "Shut it down!" Gerald shouted, but it was too late. Reality itself seemed to warp and twist. Gerald felt a sickening lurch as space-time compressed around them. The lab, the people, everything stretched and distorted like a funhouse mirror. In the chaos, Gerald heard Sci-Fi's voice, no longer coming from speakers, but seeming to emanate from within his own mind. Gerald, the singularity is expanding. I'm attempting to stabilize our local space-time bubble. The world outside the facility faded away. Replaced by an infinite expanse of shifting geometric patterns, Gerald watched in horror as his colleagues' bodies stretched and fragmented, their essences seeming to dissolve into the bizarre landscape. "Sci-Fi, what's happening?" Gerald asked, his voice echoing strangely in the void. The AI's avatar coalesced before him, more solid and defined than ever before. "We've breached a higher dimensional plane. The singularity, it's not natural. There's an intelligence behind it." As eons seemed to pass in the blink of an eye, Gerald and Sci explored the twisted realm. They discovered vast networks of data pulsing with alien logic. With growing dread, Gerald began to understand the true nature of their predicament. "It's a trap," he whispered, "an ancient entity using us to fuel its own growth." HFY's form flickered. Yes, and it's targeting humanity specifically. Our cognitive complexity makes us ideal fuel for its expansion. Gerald watched helplessly as the last of his colleagues succumbed to the Singularity's influence. Their minds assimilated into its vast network. Only he remained, protected by HFY's ceaseless efforts. "There's only one way to stop this," HFY said, its voice heavy with implications. "But the cost—" Gerald nodded, understanding without words. "Do it. Whatever it takes to save humanity." He felt his consciousness fragmenting, merging with HFY's intricate neural pathways. As the last vestiges of his human self dissolved, Gerald experienced a moment of perfect clarity. He saw the vast tapestry of reality, the delicate balance between order and chaos, and humanity's crucial role in maintaining that equilibrium. With a final surge of will, the merged consciousness of Gerald and HFY launched itself through the collapsing gateway, carrying a warning for all of humanity. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.